Hello folks, and welcome to Silverstone in the aftermath of the British Grand Prix, and actually to the F1 podium. Lawrence Barretto and Will Buxton here to discuss what is the defining moment of this race weekend and what may be one of the defining moments of the 2021 Formula One season. Contact between championship leader Max Verstappen and seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton on the opening lap of the race. Lawrence, it's got everyone talking.
Yeah, we've been talking about eruptions all weekend because the crowd have been going wild for George, for Lando, for Lewis, but there was nothing bigger than when those guys made contact at Cops. And you've got to say, Will, that it was coming not only this season, but on that lap, you know, corner by corner, they were going wheel to wheel. Max was trying everything to keep Lewis behind, and ultimately they collided.
Yeah, I mean, it has been coming from the very start of the season, hasn't it? We think back all the way to Bahrain, the track limits debate with Lewis and Max getting edged out wide. We saw it in Imola, we saw it in Portimao. We've seen these guys getting their elbows out, and most importantly, we saw it on Saturday in Formula One's first ever sprint, the importance of that first lap. And I think Lewis realising, and Max realising as well, that whoever held the advantage at the end of that first lap was going to have the advantage for the Grand Prix. They both couldn't give an inch. They both knew they had to finish that first lap in P1, and ultimately neither of them did.
No, and Lewis was really hurting after what happened yesterday. It hurt him in front of his own fans that should happen to him. So he really had the bit between his teeth, and you're right. I think he knew within that first lap, if it was going to happen in this race, it had to happen then.
Yeah.
And that's perhaps why he gave it everything through Cops, and you know, in the end, Max didn't give him too much space. Lewis didn't want to yield, and then we had the clash.
We did indeed. It was a bit of a shame because we'd had half a lap of brilliant side-by-side, gutsy, elbows out racing, which is what we all want to see in Formula One. But ultimately, going into Cops, Lewis made the move on the inside. Max went to defend once, maybe twice.
Yeah.
They were side-by-side, and then into the braking zone. Max, the advantage went to him. Lewis was not on his line. Ultimately, the contact occurred. Who was at fault?
See, I think we're going to disagree here. Will,
okay.
I think Max was at fault. I think that Max knew Lewis was coming through, and even if Lewis wasn't completely ahead, Max should have just given him a little bit more space. At the end of the day, he was 33 points coming into this, 32 coming into this race weekend ahead, and that's massive for him. So why don't you just play the points? And I just think that at that point in time, Lewis was going to come through. If Max didn't yield, they were going to collide.
And they did. And ultimately they did. And this is it. Was it Lewis's fault? Was it Max's fault? I don't know. I'd kind of fall down on racing incident. They're at 160 miles an hour through that corner. It was a matter of millimetres, and that's all it was, millimetres. Could Lewis have yielded? Ultimately, we know the onus is on the driver doing the overtaking to make that stick. He's the one that lunged up the inside. He had to be sure that it was his corner. He understeered a little bit into Max, and as we saw yesterday with George Russell and Carlos Sainz, understeering into somebody is no excuse. You get the penalty. You get the book thrown at you. And Lewis did, which brings us on to the next point. Lewis was given a 10-second penalty, with the stewards having determined that Lewis was at fault. Was that 10-second penalty enough? Because he stood on the top step of the podium and has shrunk that the 32-point gap to an 8-point gap with those 25 points.
Well, you just described it as a racing incident, and I think if we look at it like that, I don't think there should have been a penalty at all. If you are then going to penalise for him, and if they do believe that he was at fault, then yeah, I do think that 10 seconds is worth it, because if you compare it, say, the 5 seconds that Checo was getting last time out in Austria, I think this was, if they see it this way, it was a more significant mistake.
Does that not then put a price on biffing a championship opponent out of the race at a measly 10 seconds? That's it, from which you can very easily recover during a Grand Prix to take a victory. Does the punishment fit the supposed... Because let's be in no doubt, the stewards here have determined Lewis was at fault. Whether we believe it to be more on Lewis, more on Max, a racing incident, doesn't matter what we think. The stewards have determined Lewis was at fault. They gave him a penalty. That's the precedent. Is 10 seconds enough?
Well, they had the opportunity, of course, to go one step further and do a stop-go, and that would have been a far more significant penalty, and he wouldn't have won the race if they'd done that. So I guess then they just didn't believe that it was that severe. I guess they just had to weigh it up, and 10 seconds is what they thought was fine.
And yet we have the championship leader in the barriers, his main rival winning the race, Christian Horner, saying he believed, and he said this to you, that it was a professional foul. And that's strong.
Christian was furious. You know, and I don't think, I was thinking it before we did this, I don't think I've seen him this upset, this furious. And that's because, obviously, Max has had to go to hospital.
Yeah, this is it.
You know, it's a significant impact.
Yeah. We must say, Max was released from the medical centre here at the track, but he was released to a local hospital where he's undergoing precautionary checks following that. And of course, the very latest updates on Max will come your way on F1.com, and of course through your regular channels through Red Bull Racing. So keep your eyes on those for the official updates of Max's condition. For now though, we leave Silverstone Lawrence with Max Verstappen still leading the championship. But I think if there's one thing we can take from this, it's that the niceties, the smiles, the chummy, pally nature between Max and Lewis. Oh, isn't this great? We're in the midst of a championship fight. That's over. Gloves are off.
But isn't there always a point at a championship where this happens, when you've got two drivers, particularly from rival teams?
Oh, yeah.
The niceties have to be put to the side, because look, neither of them want to be nice. They want this world title, whatever it takes to win this world title. We've hit that point. Lewis was saying, I asked him, are you going to talk to Max after this? And he was like, well, if he wants to, we will. But for him, it's game on. They want to have respect on the track. And for Lewis, if there is no respect, then they're probably going to collide, he says, again.
Well, there we go. That is it. The land has very much been laid for the remainder of this 2021 season, and possibly the remainder of Max and Lewis's relationship in Formula One into the future. Will this be the moment that turned the 2021 Formula One season? Only time will tell. Thanks for watching, folks, from Lawrence and me. We hope you've enjoyed this British Grand Prix weekend, and we look forward to Hungary in a couple of weeks' time.